I bet some of you are cringing right about now because what I'm doing is just wrong. And I wouldn't even disagree with you. It's pretty much universally agreed upon amongst the Dark Souls community that resistance is the least useful stat to level, and I might as well be throwing my souls away. But here's the question. Am I playing the game wrong for putting points into it because I didn't read community posts or the wiki first? Does it make my opinion of the game less valid because I wasn't playing it in the most optimal way? These are the kinds of questions we're here to answer today, so stick around and we'll get into it. Since the dawn of time, people have been making the same arguments on the internet whenever someone has a differing opinion about a video game. You're playing it wrong, you just didn't get it, etc. I myself have been accused several times of missing the point of things, often, ironically, by people who themselves missed the entire point of the video, and it's gotten me thinking about whether you can truly play a game the wrong way. Now, first and foremost, we aren't talking about optimization, and we are going to steer away from multiplayer games like we always do on this channel. Yes, if we consider having the highest chance of success to be important, then resetting your Pokemon game until your starter has perfect IVs and the right nature is technically the most optimal way to play, but for our purposes today, we're going to assume that the driving idea behind a game is to enjoy yourself, or failing that, to feel something. Before we dive into this topic, let's take a quick look at why this argument is so prevalent. Since the dawn of time, people have been quick to get butthurt when someone else doesn't like the same things they do, since we often tie bits of our identities to the things that we like, and video games are no exception. If I'm walking around in my Watch Dogs t-shirt and someone comes up to me and tells me that they think Aiden Pierce has the charisma of a piece of wet cardboard and that the game was excruciatingly mediocre, I might begin to take that personally. We feel that on some level, our taste in entertainment media is reflective of us as people. I like this game and somebody thinks that game is stupid. Therefore, they must think that I'm stupid for liking it. Since I don't think I'm stupid, they just must not have understood this game that I like, or else they'd see it for the masterpiece that it so clearly is and know that I'm not stupid. They must have played it wrong. Honestly, that was pretty convincing. Maybe I should just end the video here. This argument is especially common in video games, since there is a skill component involved, and it is very easy to invalidate someone else's opinion on the grounds that they simply didn't possess the immense level of skill that you do, because if they did, then they'd have had a different experience and would see things your way. But let's pretend for a minute that it's okay for people to have different opinions, and that someone liking something a different amount than you doesn't fill you with uncontrollable rage. Is it possible to play games wrong? First, we need to figure out exactly what we mean by playing a game the wrong way. If you've wired up the DK bongos to your computer so you can beat Sekiro with only your butt cheeks, it's pretty clear that you aren't playing the way the developers intended, but that's clearly also a deliberate choice. What we're looking at is more so along the lines of a casual playthrough, and if there is an actual right or wrong way to play. First point of order, optimization. This is typically what people are referring to when they accuse you of playing wrong in an RPG or something with stats. Because anything but a properly min-maxed character with the best matching legendary gear drops is clearly suboptimal and not even worth using. This argument has a bit of legitimacy in some ways, but also doesn't hold up in a lot of others. Let's take Pokemon for example. There is a whole lot of optimization that you can undertake to make your team more effective and competitively viable. There are natures, EVs, IVs, RVs, abilities, team synergies, and movesets, and I only made one of those up. It can be a complete logistical nightmare to have an optimal team in a Pokemon game, to the point where a large number of competitive players simply generate their Pokemon outside the games. The point of all this is to say that I don't think a particularly large number of people would be mad at you for running a modest nature on your Great Tusk instead of an adamant one, because maybe you just want to use the Pokemon you like, and the 10% difference in stats won't make or break your game. You're technically playing the game wrong, but not playing in the most optimal way possible, but you're saving time and are having fun, so it's pretty easy to argue that shaving these bits of optimization off actually is the right way to play casually. Essentially, if we have determined that having fun is the point, and the way you're playing enables that goal, then you aren't playing the wrong way. You might consider it the wrong way to play if you go into the endgame with a team of 6 Lechonks expecting to win, but to be honest, you'd have to be trying to make that one happen, and it's a lot more analogous to the DK Bongos example from earlier. It is definitely suboptimal to run a special attacking Snorlax, but it is a legitimate way to play the game if that's the team you want to build. As far as full optimization goes, you can definitely say someone's playing the game wrong if they're trying to beat super secret raid bosses without putting in the effort to spec their character to take them on, but you can't really say they're playing the game wrong if they're just playing through the story expecting to take on the regular challenges that get in their way using the tools that have been provided to them. Okay, with that bit out of the way, let's talk about how much of playing the game wrong falls on the player and how much of it falls on the developer. An example that springs to mind quickly is Darkest Dungeon, a game that I think is legitimately fantastic, but also one that I have a major beef with. From when I played it several years ago, DLC and patches since the time I played it may have changed things up a bit, so take my complaints with a grain of salt. What happened to me in this game was that I played through it for about 30 odd hours, generally having a blast, conquer most of the challenges in front of me without a ridiculous amount of trouble. Then I came up against the final dungeon of the game and was immediately pulped, not coming anywhere in the vicinity of being even close to completing the dungeon. I was confused to say the least, since I had a full team of maxed out characters and high level items equipped, and didn't even seem to stand a chance. I decided to look it up, and the general consensus of the time was that you absolutely needed to be stacking stun abilities and relics to boost them to stand any chance in the endgame, and most other strategies were pretty much an invitation to get your ass kicked. Now, you could say I was just playing the game wrong, get good scrub, and it's all my fault that I didn't know what to do when I got to that point. But I think there's an argument to be made that the game itself shares some of the blame. Again, disclaimer, this may have been rebalanced in my experience with the game back then, isn't necessarily indicative of its current state. This argument goes that if a game wants me to play a certain way, it shoulders the burden of at least pushing me in the direction of that strategy. If I've been able to reach an endgame challenge using a particular strategy or mixture of character classes, it stands to reason that I should be able to at least have a chance at completing that challenge using those same strategies. This is similar to one of the biggest complaints in the original version of Deus Ex Human Revolution, when you could fully optimize your character around hacking or stealth, but then were locked into mandatory combat boss fights with no option to use the skills you'd been developing along the way to defeat those bosses. This would be somewhat fixed in the re-release, by the way. If a game presents several options, each with equal prominence, and allows us to choose between them, it seems reasonable that a well-designed game would allow each of these options to be at least somewhat viable. Can you really be at fault for playing a game wrong if the game lets you play it that way with no indication that it wasn't right? A game with tighter design wouldn't let you play it in a way that would set you up for failure later, so you could credibly argue that the ability to accidentally play a game in the wrong way is a flaw inherent to the design of that game. This isn't to say that all games need to be perfectly designed masterpieces, but it is a valid critique of a game that it doesn't adequately communicate to the player how they should be playing in order to have the best experience. So far, we've been talking about different builds and approaches to the challenges the game presents, but that still leaves overall playstyle to discuss. Whether you rush through the critical path to the end of the game or mess around exploring every dead end in the hopes of finding collectibles can vastly alter the experience that you have with a game, and is, as always, also a reason you might be told you're playing a game wrong. This is a problem very common in open game design where a completionist or main path only playthrough can result in a wildly different experience. For example, I completed everything in Ghost of Tsushima, a very good game that I struggle to recall fondly. At some point during my playthrough, and I really can't pinpoint when it happened, I stopped having fun and found myself just slogging my way to the end. I decided to get all the trophies, and in order to do so, had essentially done every side activity in the game, which resulted in a bloated experience that I found was ultimately out of sync with the story. The impact of the excellent ending was somewhat lessened by the fact that I was more relieved to be finished collecting flowers and taking baths than I was glad to be reaching the end of my journey. This was a game that I enjoyed large parts of, that I think I would have liked a lot more if I'd played it a different way. There's no real answer to whether you can be doing this wrong or not, because honestly, it's all up to preference and how you like to play games, and it just comes down to whether you gelled with the way that game was meant to be played or not. Every aspect of a game resonates with somebody differently, and whether you thought collecting flowers in Ghost of Tsushima was a good time, and you loved taking baths and completing haikus, or if you thought it was just kind of an unnecessary distraction, is really personal and up to how you like to play games. So it's difficult to say it's wrong, because to me, what was wrong for me might have been right for somebody else. You might have thought that the haikus were a lovely distraction and a fun bit of flavor and character added to the game, but to me it was just an item to tick off a list that, to be honest, I chose to tick off, and that was what ruined my experience. So playing a game right or wrong as far as your playstyle is entirely personal and entirely up to you, because your experience isn't everybody else's, which relates to our next point quite nicely. How do skill and playstyle relate to our opinions on games? Now that we've gone over the main reasons that you might get accused of playing a game wrong, we'll have a look at how that argument is applied to invalidate the opinions of people who apparently don't play games perfectly. First and foremost, the skill level of critics and pundits is often called into question when those who disagree don't think the person talking about it is skilled enough to give a reasonable critique of a game. The most famous examples of this are Cuphead and Doom 2016, which both had famous clips of people playing the game poorly circulated around, and which were both used to discredit the people playing the games and the publications that they worked for. They were playing the game wrong and lacked skill, the argument went, so their opinion isn't valid. And that is kind of true, but only if we add a massive asterisk. If someone talking about a game is unskilled and doesn't engage with all the systems of the game in an optimal manner, their opinion isn't valid. To someone who does play optimally and skillfully. If you're a casual observer who doesn't play a lot of games and maybe would also struggle to jump over that block in Cuphead, then an opinion on the game coming from that guy is a lot more meaningful to you than it would be coming from X Sweaty Sniper X420, who speedruns it in 12 minutes and probably also bangs your mom. The argument that we're making here is that no opinion is invalid, it just isn't necessarily relevant. If you're someone who loves to explore every corner of every game looking for glitches, secrets, and missing textures, or you're the kind of person who plays EVE Online, then the opinions of speedrunners or even just people who play at a generally fast pace aren't relevant. For example, I like Age of Empires 3 the best of all the games in that series, but I don't generally like RTSs, so the missing features and simplifications and streamlining are more of a positive for me than they are a negative. RTS gamers should not trust my opinion because it won't match what they see in those types of games, but a more casual player looking to dip their toe in might agree with what I have to say on the subject. There aren't really any invalid opinions about games, just irrelevant ones, assuming you've played the game, that is. If you're one of those people who downvotes the game you haven't played because you don't like the costume your favorite character was wearing in the trailer, then your opinion doesn't count. At the end of the day, we need to remember that games are subjective bits of entertainment, and it's okay to like or dislike them as much as you feel makes sense to you. Someone else doesn't necessarily play a game wrong because they have different feelings than you do, or because they skipped all the side quests and only played the main story. It just means their comments on the game maybe aren't applicable to you. And if you're listening to this right now thinking, this guy is a tool, of course you can play games wrong, maybe I'm just not the right channel for you. Leave a comment anyway though, it helps with the algorithm. If you do agree with me, maybe think about liking, subscribing, and all that jazz. Thanks as always for sticking around to the end of the video. I appreciate everyone who watches, but especially you guys who stick around to the end. More than that though, I appreciate my one Patreon subscriber. Sure would be nice to have more of those. Anyway, I've been doing these videos for about 8 months now, and we're inching towards my very modest goal of 500 subscribers in the first year, which we'll celebrate by giving away a few Steam keys. Nothing expensive, mind you, just what a few months of a single Patreon subscriber can buy. So make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for the next video, which should be my playthrough of Homefront: The Revolution, unless something else distracts me before I finish that particular turd off. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.